Uh, Nick, I'm going to pronounce your name Sincaglia, correct?
That's correct.
All right, good. So, welcome, Nick Sincaglia, to This Week in Music. We'll give you some applause. I love your bio, Nick, and I think I'm so excited to talk to you because you're talking about a lot of you've experienced the beginning of the streaming era, and now you're living in it now. Why don't you just really quickly share with us who you are, what you do now, and how you got your start in the industry?
Okay, yeah, I'm Nick Sincaglia. Yeah, what I do now is I I run a company called Nuemeta, and we're primarily in the business of helping either streaming companies or content companies exchange content and data with each other. So we're really in the data exchange business. I kind of found myself here um, mainly because I got my start early on in the music industry on the digital side of the business. So I moved out to California, Silicon Valley area, in the early 2000s, right as the Web 1.0 days were starting, and I have a music background. I studied music and I studied engineering in school, and I just happened to be at the right part of the world, in the right part of the area where all of this digital stuff was starting to happen, and got involved in a early streaming startup, and those early days in the music business were quite volatile and just went from one company to the other as digital was trying to really get its footing, and yeah, just through those experiences, ended up starting my own company, and um, we do a lot of work with streaming services, and we do digital distribution with content companies.
Nice. So back, like you saw the beginning kind of back in 2001. Now we're here now where kind of Spotify has pretty much taken over, but artists can't earn a lot of money from Spotify. There's a lot of issues there. What do you feel has been like the largest evolution you've witnessed since 2001 to currently in the music industry?
Well, we've come a long, long way. You have to take a step back and realize how far we've come. I was just thinking about a conversation I had with a friend of mine in 2003, and at the time, digital had been around since 1999, streaming and so forth. iTunes in 2003 had just launched, and I remember it was right around that time a friend of mine said, the internet still hasn't, created a star yet, and that now the internet is that's where stars get developed, is on the internet. I mean, that's where we're discovering new artists. So we've come a long, long way. Um, I also, yeah, so that's a huge, huge change. It's really the driving force for new talent is the internet. Um, and Spotify is the leading streaming service, but this digital industry is evolving and it's going to continue to evolve. And you look at what's going on in with things like TikTok, and that that like the creative, it's almost like a creative loop where you have recording artists, their content's being used to create more art, which is then being remixed and so forth. So it's like an ongoing conversation. I think we're going to see a lot more of that, and that's really going to be driving a lot of the revenues as well for many artists as well.
Go ahead, Jamar. I think you were about to ask something.
I was gonna ask, do you think the opportunity for artists to retain their funds and to retain their property, is that getting better or is that getting worse? You know, like as I mean, I just think about how much stuff is just getting put on TikTok or getting put on Instagram, and it's just like out there.
It
And
is.
there's all these conversations about retaining your masters, retaining your creative control or your intellectual property. But are we giving that away more, or are there more opportunities to retain that as we move into the future?
I think there are more opportunities to retain that, and just looking at the recent statistics. I just saw an article in Billboard just this week, where they were talking about the major labels overall share of the music industry, because that's how Spotify pays out, is really market share. They're the major labels are slowly losing market share to the indie uh, record labels, but just independent artists. And there's a whole crop of companies that are really in the business of artist services, and it's a different way of working with artists than what the major labels typically what their contracts look like. And so I do think you know and the major labels aren't really doing a lot of A&R. They're scouring the internet. And if these artists already are building a following, they can maintain their independence. And then they just work with service companies to help them get the content where it needs to be to maximize the revenues and things like that.
What's the difference between working with a service company and working with a label?
Service company is really it's more about like service fees, things like that. And sometimes there are some revenue share models, but they're fairly favorable from an artist standpoint. I mean, when you look at these major label contracts, you're looking at you know almost like an 80-20 sort of rev share, where the labels holding on to 80%, whereas the independent artists can cut individual deals and hire certain companies to do certain things for them. So I'll give an example. Like you can hire a distribution company to get your song onto Spotify, and you can hire a company like Song Trust to help you collect your music publishing royalties. And you can work with a company that just focuses on optimizing your YouTube performance and things like that. So you're hiring a number of different companies that have just really very focused activities that their expertise on. And yeah, you pay based on the value that they're providing, and you can always switch. You're not locked in. These are just service contracts.
I got it. Um, you talked about metadata, and I know you work a lot with metadata. How
Yes.
important, because we do have artists that are watching this and people watch this on video, how important is metadata, and how does that feed into what's called like black box income, where money just goes into this mysterious box and never gets attributed to the artist?
Yeah. So first and foremost is yeah, I've really focused a lot on metadata in the work that I do. I have to say, metadata is literally the most boring part of the entertainment business. I mean, you couldn't get any more boring. However, it's really crucial. And one of the for artists out there, um, it is there's not a lot of education around metadata. um, but I think the key pieces of the important pieces that I think artists need to understand is that um, is really around unique identifiers. Again, another very boring topic, but um, when your content gets put onto these services, and when performing rights organizations are collecting on your behalf, um, the easiest way to identify the content and all the participants who contributed to that content is really through unique identifiers. And so when it comes to sound recordings, a key identifier is the ISRC code, which is the International Standard Sound Recording Code. And on the publishing side, there's a standard called ISWC, which is International Standard Work Code. And so, you know, some of the basic things you can do are just, you know, keeping track of of what your ISRCs are for each of your songs, and just, you know, throwing them into a spreadsheet so that, you know, when you're working with people, you can say, you know, these are my songs, here are all my ISRC codes, here are all my ISWC codes. And they're now even working with artist name identifiers. And the reason why these identifiers are so important is because your artist name is is very unlikely to be unique. Your song titles are very unlikely to be unique. And so there's so much content that's being created, and these companies that are working on your behalf, that are trying to keep track of all the millions and billions of plays across the globe. Um, you know, there is no time to be able to disambiguate whether this is, you know, this is uh, this artist or it's this other artist with the same name or titles and so forth. So, you know, in order to help the data flow, and once the data is flowing, the money flows. So in order to kind of oil those gears, it's really around the identifiers. And some, you know, a lot of artists are working with distributors that will help them assign these codes. But just, you know, taking note of what they are, and kind of keeping track of them, just like in a simple spreadsheet, is really important as you know, maybe stop working with one company and you start working with another. You have that information, and then they can really work on your behalf really much more efficiently.
Nice, nice. We want to say a quick shout out, Jay Nice. Though you got to bounce because you got to get up early in the morning for work on this pop station. So thank you very much for being with us. Appreciate you. Give you a round of applause.
Thank you, Monty. Nick, good seeing you, bro. All right.
Yeah, good seeing you.
All right, so round of applause. Nick and I are going to continue talking, but Jada's got to get to bed because we got work in the morning. For sure, for sure. While I do a quick adjustment here, I was going to ask you, Nick, when you are giving people advice, because we have a lot of young musicians in the audience, when you're giving people advice in terms of when they want to join and work in the industry, what advice do you give them? And what do you feel are like emerging parts of the industry that young students, such as me and my students, should pay attention to as they look for jobs? Now, give me 1 minute while you think on that. I'm going to do a quick change for us real quick here. And let me see here. We'll do this real quick here. Hold on. So as you're thinking about that, so, okay, there we go. Now, what do you think about that?
Well, it's actually it's something that I think about a lot. I also am a adjunct professor at DePaul University's music school. So
Nice.
when I teach my students, I really try to orient the class around being practical and thinking about their career. I'm not an academic myself. I just teach one class once a year, and then I'm an entrepreneur the rest of the year. So I'm always talking to them about this, and so what I would say is, or what I tell that my students is, it's a this industry is so complex and confusing that you know, the fact that they're in school and they're studying the subject, they just need that first experience. They need to, I always say, you need to get your pinky toe in the door. And once your pinky toe is in the door, you can develop that experience and that knowledge. You'll see it firsthand. And because the industry is complicated and that experience is really valuable, and people will continue to hire people with that experience. It's just so hard to take somebody who has no music experience and try to bring them in the industry. There's just so much to learn. Intellectual property, the whole business is based on intellectual property law, which is incredibly confusing. And so,
Yes.
and then on there's the law, but then there are industry accepted practices, and so understanding how those work is really valuable. And so you get your pinky toe in the door, next thing you know, your whole foot's in the door, your whole leg, and then before you know it, your whole body is through the door, and you are in the industry pretty much for life if you choose to stay in it. I think so. Getting that first opportunity, and it really doesn't matter really what it is. People want to work with people they like, they trust, people who do what they say they're going to do. And so just be a quality human being, get that experience, show your passion. It's also a business, and so businesses have to have people with skills. And so whether it's tech skills or accounting skills or, you know, knowledge about the legal aspect of the industry or, licensing. So, look to really build those skills, and you combine, those basic business skills with industry specific knowledge, and you'll get hired over and over again. You just have to be persistent. And I guess my last piece of advice is yeah, be persistent. Knock on those doors, and don't be afraid to repeatedly knock on some of the same doors.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just a timing issue. They don't have they don't have a job rec, but maybe the fifth time you knock on the door, suddenly they have budget, and wow, you've been persistent. You must really want to do this. All right, we'll give you a shot. You know, it's an entry
Yeah.
level job, and you seem like you have passion. So, all right, this time you knocked. We're gonna let you in.
Got it. You mentioned licensing. What is your opinion on how important music licensing is in today's music world?
It's really important. I mean, licensing is a really broad topic. There's all sorts of different licensing. What I'm seeing now is we're kind of moving into a new era, a little bit of a new era on the internet. And I mentioned TikTok a little bit earlier. Um, there is this the use of music is now being democratized, and it's not just TikTok. It's also the Facebook and Instagram properties. There's YouTube Shorts. So all of this content being used by the general public has to be licensed. And so getting your content, licensing it out, and also potentially at the same time distributing it to some of these big platforms which users want to express themselves in their own ways. That's all done through licensing. I think in the past, a lot of people think of licensing in terms of like movies and television shows, but it's even broader than that. That's still a big um, uh, area of revenue. Um, but it's not, I think actually the pie is growing even bigger because of
Yes.
these other platforms and the democratization of creativity.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. TikTok. Can this momentum continue? If you're advising new artists nowadays, do you say immediately get your stuff on TikTok and create viral dances and things? What's your perspective on that? Because that's a hot topic in the industry right now.
Yeah, I just watched a really good video by Vox Media that was talking about what happens to a piece of music once it gets on TikTok, and it's really interesting. The video, they did a deep dive analysis, and they really showed that you know what the consumers are seeing on TikTok is just a short clip, and there is a desire. If there's a desire to hear more, it really jumps to Spotify, at least here in the U.S. Um, and so there is this synergy between these two different platforms. What I thought was interesting is a lot of people outside of the U.S. Or inside the U.S. may not know this, but the company that owns TikTok is a company called ByteDance, and they also own a streaming service called Resso. And so, you know, I'm sure they're very aware of the synergy between the TikTok platform and Spotify. I'm sure they're going to make efforts to keep that all in house so that it goes from TikTok to Resso. So we'll
Wrestling.
see. We'll see how things go there. Yeah, Resso is in emerging markets. It's in Brazil. It's in India. Um, I forget where else, but yeah, it's a viable streaming service. They do decent numbers in emerging markets.
Interesting. Um, when we think about books, because I love to read,
Mm.
and I'm actually creating a intro. Well, we can't call it intro music business. We're calling it music business class for students all over Cal State Fullerton. And I'm going to have a nice reading list for them. What's the one or two books you feel, if anyone wants to learn more about the music industry or working in industry, that you would recommend right away?
The first one that comes to mind is a book called Digital Copyright by a woman named Jessica Littman. And the reason I recommend this book is because um, in my day-to-day work, when I was working at streaming services, my day-to-day job was to receive content and then get it cleared and then publish it for consumers. And that job really required me to understand how copyright worked. And what I noticed was copyright was very, very inconsistent. Sound recordings are treated very differently than music compositions. And I was always puzzled by, like, why doesn't copyright law make sense at all? And I read this book, and it explained copyright law from a historical perspective and how attitudes towards copyright changed over time. And copyright is not a God given right, it's a government given right. And so the government's attitudes towards different types of copyrights have evolved. And then, of course, technology drives a lot of these changes. And when you see um, copyright law from that historical perspective, and quite frankly, it's almost a book on, it's almost like the history of, like, political corruption too. It's in some ways you start to now understand, why this is it doesn't it's not consistent, and you understand why it's not consistent because music composition rights were argued over when the player piano was a new invention, and then 50 years later sound recordings started to get commercialized. Well, that's a whole generation of new politicians. And then, of course, even today, radio in the US doesn't pay performing rights for terrestrial radio. Well, why is that? Well, that's the radio lobby. In Europe, they get paid for that. So, why are these inconsistencies? That book, it was interesting because I had read a lot up until that book. As soon as I read that book, I was like, okay, I don't need to read anything more about copyright. I get it. Right?
Interesting.
It was like
Okay.
I was on this pursuit, and it kind of helped end this pursuit, and I moved on to learning other things. So that's the one I think is the one book I would recommend.
I love it. I wrote it down. I'm always looking to read more, especially I have summertime reading, so that'll help me prepare for class next semester. What trends in the music industry? Oh, hold on. Before that, we had a question from the audience before I get all. Um, Thank you, Miss Diva Arts, for this question. All right, well, let me put it on the screen here. But do major labels still hold power of profit now than how they did a quarter century ago?
Um, I th- yes and no, right? I do think, I mean, the record labels are, you know, a- they are companies that are, you know, their whole business is helping, you know, to basically create stars and to break records, and they have this, you know, engine that just focuses on that. Um, and they're very good at it, and they've been at it for a really long time. And so, yes, they still hold a lot of power. Um, However, you're starting to see independent artists really talking about um, the benefits of being independent, and you can build a really great career. You may not be a household name, but you may actually have more money in your pocket
Mhm.
at the end of the day. So, if you, you know, the major labels are going to help an artist break much faster and much bigger um, than an than it would than an independent artist could on their own. But, you know, when it all comes down to it, you know, what are you in it for? Is it, you know, are you there to create a career for yourself and put money in your pocket? Or is it an ego thing? Do you want to be famous? Right. And so, you know, you got to kind of ask yourself, and do you want to spend 15 years slowly building a career, or do you want to, you know, do you want to in 5 years? I mean, it's all hard work. Um, you know, in the end, there is no shortcut. I don't think, but um, you know, I see this on the entrepreneur side as well. I'm, you know, a tech entrepreneur, and you know, you see the same things with VCs. You know, venture capital. They can put lots of money in your bank account, and they can help you scale it and so forth. Is your, you know, success rate any better? You know, it's arguable. Or are you okay with just growing the business slowly, one day at a time, and just doing quality work and really carving out a niche, and then, you know, a living essentially.
Right. You mentioned tech and VCs. What trends are you following very closely right now in the industry?
You know, the one area that I'm particularly interested in is, and I just saw a television commercial for it last night. I saw an Apple commercial just last night, and they were promoting their new AirPods with spatial audio. And
Oh,
spatial audio is just an area I'm interested in. Before before I got into the streaming music business, I actually worked for an audio company that was creating what they essentially called 3D audio or virtual audio. And this was way back in 1997. But this technology has been around since the 1970s. And I'll just quickly give you a little bit of background on it. But it's what they realized in the 1970s. They were working with fighter pilots, and they were realizing that, you know, your senses, your visual senses, can only handle so much information. So they started to use 3D audio to help pilots receive more information, because different parts of your brain are actually receiving information from different senses. Um, it started this, you know, technology started to enter into the entertainment industry, and so now Apple's making a big push around spatial audio, and what they're doing is they're taking multi-track recordings and putting them in a virtual room. And since many people, I would say most people, are now listening to music with headphones, they are now creating these virtual environments where the sounds are actually in these virtual environments, and the sounds can move, and it gives you a real sense of real space. And what I found with it is, I was listening to some really old recordings I grew up with. I've heard a million times. But when I listened to them remixed with Dolby Atmos, or Sony has Sony 360 is a competing product. These
Right.
virtual sound mixes I did hear things in the mix that I didn't hear before, and I think that's a product of how your brain can take in more information when there's directionality or movement in the sound, as opposed to when if you listen to stereo with headphones, the lead vocal sounds like it's inside your head, whereas virtual audio, they're actually trying to virtualize the audio in a 3D space, and this lead vocals sound more in front of you, not inside your head. So
Mm.
that's, I think, an interesting uh, area that I'd like to see where it goes. Um, Apple has a big incentive to promote it because they have a lot of hardware products that they're betting on selling by promoting this way of mixing music.
Interesting. All right. All right. I think the final question I have for you is just really, besides trends, anything else we should pay attention to in the industry that you think is going to become a bigger story than it is now? And I'll kind of let you kind of answer that question any way you want, because there's a lot of things that have happened in the past, and you've seen a lot, whether it's your experience at AOL and as you progress through your career. Like, outside of trends, what else should we keep an eye on, whether it be copyright, independent labels like A&R, the new way of doing AR? What comes to mind when I ask you that question?
Yeah, it's a really tough question to answer. What I can tell you is I feel like the industry is looking for the next steady state.
Mm,
And I don't, because everybody can operate more predictably when they feel like they know, okay, we went from physical product and now we're in the streaming era, and this is where it's going to stay. And then we can invest in things, and the future is digital. But what I would say is that I wouldn't get too comfortable. And this industry is going to evolve, and I can't tell you exactly how it's going to evolve, but you shouldn't get too comfortable. And being an entrepreneur myself, the evolution is another word for opportunity, right? So, there are some as things change, um, there are going to be new trends and there are going to be new revenue streams. It seems like the pie just keeps getting bigger. It's almost never that something becomes obsolete. It just there's there's something new that's added. There's more revenue streams that can be generated. So um, yeah, the industry's still evolving, and I mean, you hear a lot about it when this Web3, that
yes.
is all the
Yeah.
buzz these days. I mean, don't from my experience, Web3 is going to take 20 years at least. When I was in Silicon Valley, we thought consumers were going to stream, within a couple of years, and it took 20 years for the consumer to change their habits and really see the value. And there's also a lot of what I call like connective tissue technology that really, needs to be there. You know, the fact that you could buy downloads in 2001, but your hard drives were too small. You couldn't download them onto a device. You didn't have smartphones. You didn't have bandwidth, wireless bandwidth like we do now. So it just took time. And Web3 I don't think is going to be any different. Um, but I think that is going to have some interesting impacts there, and it's going to be, again, the things that drive Web3 are going to be the really boring things, but they're so fundamental. Like they're going to deal with things like identity and distributed systems and things like that. And it's just going to take a while to get there. So I wouldn't get too excited about Web3 yet, but definitely keep an eye on it. I think there's definitely some value there.
Got it. If people want to keep in touch with you or reach out to you after meeting you on the show, what's the best way to do that?
Basically through my company website, nuemeta.com. And we also run a distribution service called Digital DIY Distribution, which we work with a lot of record labels and aggregators. So either of those websites, you can reach me.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for taking time out of your day to spend time with us. You've definitely given us a nice education lesson here, so appreciate that.
Excellent.
And we'll be
Appreciate
sure to
the
keep in touch.
yeah, excellent. Thank you for having me.
Awesome. Round of applause for Nick in the chat. All right. See you soon.
Thank you.